Hey guys, Sean from Smash Mouth. You remember us. I've been a full-time musician for over 10 years now, so smash that like button and hit subscribe, because I'm going to share with you 5 things I wish I knew before I started. Number 1, make sure you have a deal between band members. If you're like me, and I got here in 2003, came to LA to be a rock star. So when I came here, I wanted to be in a band. I'm sure most of you do. Well, unless you want to be the main artist. Big sign. Anyway, 90% of the bands fail because they didn't have an agreement, a deal. You have to talk about these things. It's super, super, super important. Here's where the bands fail. They get the deal, or they start touring, and then the arguments start about who's getting paid what, who's in charge of this, who's in charge of that. This guy can't do that gig. Does he get replaced? Does he get subbed for that gig? All of these things are going to come up when you're in a band. This deal doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a simple email with some details in it. It can also be a 40-page deal that you ran by your lawyers. Doesn't really matter. You just all need to be comfortable and think about what the future is going to hold. Here are a few things to think about when you're writing this thing out. Writing. What's the split? If there are 5 guys in the band and 2 write the song, is it 50-50 between them, or is it 20% for each one of you? Is it every song that's going to be split evenly, or is it just specific songs that are going to be 50% to those 2 people, or these 3 people wrote that song, so it's going to be 33.33333% to each one of them? You have to think about these things, and you have to be cool to each other. So don't be like, well, I wrote all the lyrics, so I want 50%. Nah, dude, you're hanging with your band. You're working on this together. So I'm not saying you can't do that, but definitely take into account other people's feelings and try to keep everyone on the same page. I know when I write in the studio with other people, 99.999%, it's always been a fair and even split. So if there are 4 people in the room, everyone gets 25%, no matter who wrote what. If there's 2 people in the room, each gets 50. Even if I brought the biggest idea and they added 3 lyrics to the whole song, doesn't matter. There's an agreement in advance that there's a 50-50 split. That way we don't have to think about it. It's just there. Once you have that in writing, you don't have to worry about that being an issue later on. It's been agreed to, now you can just create. The whole point of this is to create, so get the business part out of the way. Actually, on that point, another thing you should do, my personal recommendation, is handle business in a business environment, not in the creative environment. Don't handle the business in the studio. Don't handle the business in the rehearsal spot. Go grab a cup of tea, grab a cup of coffee, go to McDonald's, wherever you want. Sit down, talk about some business. Go to an office, talk about some business. But don't do it near the instruments. Don't do it near the vibe. Keep the creative vibe in the studio and in the rehearsal spot. Money. How is it being split? Who's spending the money up front? Who's getting the money on the back end? These are all things that need to be discussed before, and everyone needs to be okay with them. Before you get deep into it, you need to know how you each feel about touring and how much one person is going to be available for touring. Maybe 4 guys in the band or 4 girls in the band are like, yeah, anytime a tour comes up, let's do it. And then there's one person is like, well, I'm a CEO of a company. I don't know. I mean, I can't take that much time off. You really need to discuss this before that guy ends up putting money into the band and then can't be there. All these things really need to be discussed before. There's plenty more where this came from, but it's way too much and I want to move on, so we'll do that in another video. Number 2, the money is in writing and publishing. As I mentioned before, one of the things you're going to cover in the band deal memo, or call it what you will, is writing. How is it being split? So something you want to be aware of is when you're writing a song, there are 2 parts to it. There's the writing and the publishing. I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm also going to leave that up to another video because there's a lot to it. But what you need to know is that writing and publishing is where the money is. If you want longevity as a musician, if you want to have a long career and you don't want to be touring until you're 80, let's face it, they're probably not going to be even hiring you after you're 50. So you need to be thinking about long-term investments, and this is one of them, writing. Over the years, as you probably know by now, the record industry did one of these, right? So people aren't buying albums anymore. People are buying singles, and people really aren't buying singles anymore. They're streaming singles. So the money is made in different ways over time. The one thing you need to know if you want longevity is you need to own some writing and some publishing. So remember what I said before in the deal between the band members. When they say, okay, well, how should we split the writing? Don't be the guy that says, that's okay, I don't need any writing, I'm just doing it for the chicks. No, you definitely want writing and publishing. We'll dig deeper into that in other videos, but just know in advance, that's where the money is. Number 3, negotiating. This is something you don't really have to worry about that much. If you're playing in a band with your friends, colleagues, it's not really a concern. But if you're taking your profession to the next level and you want to play with solo artists and you want to play with other bands where it's not just your friends and you need to ask for money, you need to know what to expect before you get into the negotiation process. Number 1, they'll say yes. If you ask for X amount of money and they say yes, problem solved. Number 2, they tell you they really like you and they want to pay you what you want, but they don't have the money. Whether they're telling the truth or just negotiating, it doesn't matter. They're willing to work with you. So you can negotiate from there on. You can just go back and forth and meet somewhere in the middle. Or you can just say, okay, I understand where you're coming from. Let's do that. Totally up to you. I say you always have to read the signs that are around you. Know who you're talking to and know their situation. Don't try to push people to give you $10,000 a week when you know they're eating popcorn at home and they don't have money for anything. Like, that's not going to work. But then there's a third option that you may hear, and you need to be ready for this. And it might just be because they don't like the fact that you're negotiating. They might not actually have the money. They might not like your attitude. Whatever it is, you get fired. Negotiating is a whole science into itself. We'll get into that in another video. But before you get into the negotiation process, be okay with any one of those 3 outcomes. You have to be okay with them. If you're not, don't negotiate. Number 4, dealing with difficult people. So you negotiated and you got the gig, you got the money you wanted, everything is great, you're going on tour, or you're going into the studio for a month, whatever it is, congratulations. From my experience, no matter what you do, there's always going to be someone in the production that doesn't like you. There's nothing you can do about that. Sometimes people just aren't going to like you, and sometimes you won't like them. Sometimes there's just someone in the production that's going to be an asshole, and that's okay. Because you're not paid to like them and they're not paid to like you. You're only paid to do your job. So that's what I need you to focus on. You're always going to find people in every production that don't get along with you. Don't worry about it. Just focus on your job. If you need to play guitar that night, play guitar. If you need to play keys that night, play keys. If you just need to be production designer that day, be the production designer. Don't worry about the musician that's bugging you. Don't worry about it. And that brings me to my final tip. Number 5, don't burn bridges. Knowing when to leave a gig is just as important as getting the gig. When there's a time and you and a specific person don't get along and that's getting in the way of the job getting done right, the gig is not as smooth as it should be. There's fighting, there's tension. Sometimes you have to be the bigger person and leave. The more important thing is the relationships that you're creating along the road and the gigs that stay intact. You'll get another gig. But if you burn this bridge, you never know what you're going to lose long term. No matter where you are in your career, I really hope this helped you. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more tips like this in the future.